There's something strange about the way your life repeats. Not in obvious ways. Not always in big patterns. But in subtle, almost invisible cycles. The same type of thoughts. The same emotional reactions. The same outcomes, wearing different disguises. And if you've reached a point where you already understand a lot, you've read, reflected, maybe even changed parts of your life, then this becomes even more frustrating. Because at some point, you start to notice something unsettling. You know what to do, but you still don't do it. You see the pattern, but you still fall into it. You understand the mechanism, but your reality doesn't change. And most explanations stop here. They tell you it's discipline, or habits, or mindset. But none of those explain the real problem. Because the real problem is not that you're stuck. It's that you're running something, automatically. Like a system that keeps executing in the background. And the reason it feels so real, so convincing, is because you don't experience it as a system. You experience it as yourself. That's why it's so hard to question. That's why it feels like, this is just how things are. But here's the shift. What if nothing in your life is actually repeating by accident? What if the patterns you see, the thoughts you keep thinking, the reactions you keep having, the situations you keep attracting, are not random at all, but outputs of something structured, something consistent, something that follows rules? Because if that's true, then your life is not a mystery. It's a process. And processes can be interrupted. They can be changed, rewritten, rewired. But only if you stop trying to fix the result and start looking at what's generating it. Now here's where this gets deeper. Because if what you're living is being generated, then the real question is not, why does this keep happening to me? The real question is, what is producing this, again and again? And even more importantly, if something is producing your reality in real time, why does it feel so hard to step out of it, even when you see it clearly? That's what almost no one explains. And that's exactly what we're going to break down. Because once you see how this system actually works, you stop trying to change your life from the outside. And you start changing the mechanism that's creating it. And when that happens, change doesn't take years. It can start happening in days. To understand why your life keeps repeating, you need to see something most people never question. Your brain is not reacting to reality. It's predicting it. That sounds subtle, but it changes everything. Because the common assumption is simple. Something happens, you react. But that's not how your mind actually works. What really happens is this. Your brain builds a model of what it expects to happen, and then matches reality to that model, not the other way around. So instead of responding to the world, you're constantly anticipating it, filling in gaps, completing patterns, projecting meaning before anything fully unfolds. Which means, by the time you think you're reacting, most of the response is already decided. This is why two people can go through the same situation and experience completely different realities. Same environment, same conversation, same external facts, but internally, completely different interpretations, different emotions, different outcomes, because they're not seeing the same thing. They're seeing different predictions. Now here's where it gets deeper. These predictions are not random. They're built from repetition, from what your brain has seen before, felt before, learned to expect. And over time, this becomes automatic. So automatic that you stop noticing it. You just assume. This is reality. But it's not. It's a constructed version of reality. Filtered. Compressed. Pre-interpreted. And once a prediction becomes stable enough, your brain starts protecting it, reinforcing it, even bending your perception to keep it consistent. That's why certain patterns feel so real, so obvious, so unquestionable. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. Now think about what that means. If your brain is constantly predicting, then your experience is not built from what's happening now. It's built from what your system expects to happen, which leads to a question almost no one asks. If your reality is based on prediction, where are those predictions coming from? Because if you don't see that, you'll keep trying to change what you do, without ever touching what's generating it. And that's why nothing really shifts. You adjust behavior, but the pattern returns. You try new strategies, but the same results reappear. Because underneath all of that, the model stays the same. And as long as the model stays the same, the output will always reorganize itself to match it. Different situation, same structure, different people, same dynamic, different attempt, same ending. So the real problem is not what you're doing, it's what your system is expecting. And that brings us to the next layer. Because if what you experience is not reality itself, but a prediction shaped by an internal model, then the most important thing is not what's happening outside. It's what's running inside. And once you see that clearly, everything starts to reorganize. At this point, something should start to feel slightly uncomfortable. Because if your brain is predicting, then what you call reality is not exactly what you think it is. You're not experiencing the world directly. You're experiencing a model of it. A constructed version, built in real time, and optimized, not for truth, but for efficiency. Think about it like this. Your brain is not designed to show you reality as it is. It's designed to show you what is useful to keep you functioning. So instead of processing everything from scratch, it simplifies, it filters, it fills in the blanks, and most importantly, it uses what it already knows to interpret what's happening now. That's why your perception feels immediate, instant, obvious. But it's not. It's processed. Before you even become aware of something, your brain has already labeled it, interpreted it, given it meaning. And once meaning is assigned, your reaction follows automatically. This is the structure. Input comes in. The brain matches it to an internal pattern. A prediction is activated, and you experience that prediction as reality. So what you feel, what you think, what you believe is happening, is not just based on the present moment. It's shaped by a pre-existing model. And here's the critical part. That model is not neutral. It has preferences. It has tendencies. It has expectations about how things usually go. And once those expectations stabilize, they start organizing your experience. Not occasionally. Constantly. This is why certain situations feel familiar, even when they shouldn't. Why certain reactions feel automatic, even when you try to change. Why you can logically understand something and still respond the same way. Because the model doesn't change just because you understand it. It only changes when it receives new evidence, strong enough to override what it already expects. Now pause for a second and look at this clearly. If your entire experience is filtered through a model, then your results are not just coming from your actions. They're coming from the structure generating those actions. And that leads to the real question. If this model is shaping everything, why doesn't it update? Because in theory it should. You learn new things. You gain awareness. You see your patterns. So why does the system keep producing the same outputs? Why does the prediction stay the same, even when you know it's wrong? That's where most people get stuck. Because they assume that awareness is enough. That seeing the pattern should break it. But it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with where the change is being applied. Most people try to change at the level of thought or behavior, but the model sits deeper than both. Which means, you can think differently, you can act differently, and still be driven by the same underlying structure. And as long as that structure remains intact, it will keep pulling your experience back to what it already knows. This is why change feels temporary, why progress collapses, why things improve and then revert. Because the system was never actually rewritten. It was only adjusted at the surface. So now we arrive at the real problem. Not what you do, not what you think, but what is generating both. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to fix outcomes and start looking at the level where outcomes are created. But here's the mistake almost everyone makes next. They try to change behavior again, just in a more sophisticated way. And that's exactly where the loop resets. At this point, most people think they've found the answer. They realize patterns exist. They understand their reactions. They become more aware. And then they try to change. They try to think differently, act differently, respond differently. On the surface, it makes sense. If your results are not what you want, change what you do. But this is where the mistake happens. Because behavior is not the source. It's the output. And trying to change the output, without changing what generates it, is like trying to fix a reflection by touching the mirror. You can adjust it. You can temporarily distort it. But the moment you stop forcing it, it goes back. This is why so many people feel stuck in cycles of almost change. They improve, then revert. They gain clarity, then fall back. They build momentum, then lose it. Not because they lack discipline, but because the system underneath never changed. Think about it. If your brain is constantly predicting, and your perception is shaped by a model, then your behavior is simply the natural extension of that system. It's not a choice in the way you think it is. It's a consequence. A response that feels voluntary, but is heavily preconditioned. So when you try to change behavior directly, you're working against a structure that is already in motion. And that structure will always try to restore what is familiar, what is expected, what is consistent with the model. That's why willpower feels exhausting. Because you're not just making a decision, you're resisting a system. And systems are not designed to be overridden easily. They're designed to maintain stability, even if that stability is limiting. Now here's the part most people miss. When behavior doesn't change, they assume they need more effort, more discipline, more control, more repetition. So they push harder. And for a while, it works. But eventually, the system reasserts itself. Because nothing at the core was actually rewritten. This is why surface-level change doesn't last. Because it doesn't reach the layer where the pattern is being generated. So the real question is not, how do I act differently? The real question is, where is the behavior coming from before it becomes behavior? Because if you can see that, you can intervene there. Not after the reaction. Not during the reaction. But at the exact point where it begins. And that point is much earlier than you think. It happens in a fraction of a second. Before the thought fully forms. Before the emotion fully rises. Before the action feels like a choice. There's a moment. Subtle. Fast. Almost invisible. Where the prediction activates. And the rest unfolds automatically. And that moment is the only place where real change can happen. But almost no one trains themselves to see it. Because it doesn't feel like a place. It feels like nothing. Just a transition. A shift. A tiny movement inside your perception. But if you learn to notice it, you start to see the system in real time. And once you see the system, you can interrupt it. Not by force. Not by trying harder. But by stepping in before it completes. And that's where everything starts to change. If everything you've seen so far is true, then change is not about trying harder. It's about catching something earlier. Much earlier. Because by the time you're thinking about what to do, the system is already running. The reaction is already forming. The direction is already set. Which means, if you want to change your reality, you don't start at action. You don't even start at thought. You start at the moment before both. And this is where most people lose it. Because they expect change to feel obvious, clear, deliberate, controlled. But this doesn't. It feels subtle. Almost too subtle. It feels like a tiny shift in perception. A microsecond where something could go one way or another. And usually, it goes the same way it always has. Not because you chose it, but because the prediction fired. Automatically. Now here's the key. That moment, that almost invisible transition, is where the entire system can be interrupted. Not after the emotion, not after the thought, but right when the pattern begins to activate. Think of it like this. There's a sequence happening inside you, all the time. Perception, prediction, reaction. And most people only become aware at the last stage. The reaction. When it's already too late. So they try to fix it there. Control it. Suppress it. Redirect it. But that's like trying to stop a wave. After it has already broken. The real leverage point is earlier. At the level of perception. Right when something is first registered. Because that's when the brain decides. What is this? What does this mean? What should happen next? And once that meaning is assigned, everything else follows. Automatically. So if you can intervene at that exact point, you don't need to fight the reaction. You change what produces it. Now here's what makes this powerful. When you interrupt the prediction, even slightly, you create instability in the system. And systems don't like instability. They try to reorganize. They try to update. They try to resolve the mismatch. That's how reprogramming actually happens. Not through repetition of behavior, but through disruption of expectation. You break the prediction, and the brain is forced to recalculate. And when that happens enough times, the model begins to shift. Not intellectually, structurally. This is why some changes feel instant. Not because they're random, but because the underlying pattern was finally interrupted at the right level. Now here's the important part. You don't need to control everything. You don't need to fix every reaction. You only need to catch a few key moments where the pattern starts and shift them, even slightly. Because once the system starts receiving different signals, it has no choice but to adapt. And that's when your reality begins to reorganize. From the inside out. But this raises the next question. If this is the mechanism, how do you actually apply it? Not once. Not randomly. But in a way that is consistent enough to force a real change in the system. That's where most people fail. They understand the idea, but they don't apply it long enough, or precisely enough, to break the pattern. So now we need structure. A way to take this from insight to execution. And that's exactly where the 9-day protocol comes in. Because this is not about trying harder. It's about applying pressure in the right place. For long enough. To make the system change. At this point, you already understand the mechanism. Your reality is not just happening. It's being generated. In real time. Through predictions. Based on patterns. That repeat automatically. So the question now is not what to change. It's, how do you apply this in a way that actually forces the system to update? Because insight alone doesn't rewire anything. Interruption does. Consistency does. Precision does. And that's exactly what this 9-day structure is designed to create. Not motivation. Not discipline. But pressure on the system. In the right place. For long enough. That it has no choice but to reorganize. Days 1 to 3, pattern interruption. The goal here is simple. Not to change your life, but to start seeing the loop in real time. This is where most people fail, because they're too focused on fixing, instead of observing. So for these first 3 days, you don't try to correct anything. You don't force different behavior. You don't try to be better. You only do one thing. You catch the moment where the pattern begins. That microsecond. Right before the reaction fully forms. When something triggers you. A thought, a situation, a feeling. Instead of following it automatically, you pause. Not physically. Internally. Just enough to notice. This is the loop. That's it. No resistance. No suppression. No correction. Just recognition. Because recognition creates separation. And separation weakens automatic execution. At first, this will feel almost impossible. You'll miss most of it. The system will run as usual. But even catching it once or twice a day is enough to start creating instability. And instability is exactly what we want. Days 4 to 6, destabilizing the prediction. Now the system has been observed. It's no longer completely invisible, which means we can go one step further. Instead of just noticing the pattern, you slightly interrupt it. Not by force, but by shifting your response at the point of activation. When the same trigger appears, and the same reaction starts forming, you do something different. Not dramatically different. Just enough to break continuity. If you normally withdraw, you stay a little longer. If you normally react quickly, you delay by a few seconds. If your mind jumps to a conclusion, you question it before accepting it. These are small changes, but they happen at the exact moment the prediction is trying to stabilize, which creates friction inside the system. Now your brain receives conflicting signals. This is what I expected, but this is not what is happening. And when that mismatch repeats, the model starts to loosen. It becomes less rigid, less certain, more open to updating. That's the shift. Days 7 to 9, rebuilding the pattern. Now the system is unstable. The old pattern is no longer automatic in the same way. And this is where most people make another mistake. They relax. They stop applying pressure. And the system goes back to what it knows. So in these final days, you don't go back. You reinforce the new direction. But not through force. Through consistency. Now when the pattern starts, you don't just interrupt it. You guide it. You consciously choose a different response. At the same point of activation. Not randomly, but repeatedly. So the brain starts recognizing. This is the new pattern. This is the new expectation. And once an expectation stabilizes, it becomes automatic. Just like the old one. This is how reprogramming actually happens. Not through intensity, but through repeated disruption, followed by consistent redirection. And after enough cycles, the system updates. Not because you forced it, but because it adapted. Now here's the part that matters most. This only works if you stay precise. If you apply this at the level of perception, not just behavior. Because if you miss that point, you're back to fighting reactions. And that's a losing game. But if you stay at the source, everything changes. And that leads to the final piece. Because once the system updates, you start to see something unexpected. Your reality doesn't just feel different. It starts behaving differently. Not because the world changed, but because the pattern generating your experience did. At this point, something should be clear. Your life is not just a sequence of events. It's a sequence of outputs, generated by patterns, running in real time, through a system you rarely notice. And for a long time, you tried to change those outputs directly. You tried to act differently, think differently, control your reactions. But now you can see why that never fully worked. Because you were trying to change the result without touching the source. And the source was always there, running silently, repeating what it already knew, projecting what it expected, organizing your experience around a model that you didn't even realize was active. But now you do. Now you can see the loop. You can see the prediction forming. You can see the moment where the pattern begins. And once you see it, you're no longer completely inside it. You have a gap, a space, a point of intervention, and that changes everything. Because from that point forward, your life stops being something you react to and starts becoming something you can influence. Not by force, not by control, but by changing what generates your experience in the first place. This is the shift most people never make. They stay at the level of outcomes, trying to fix what appears, instead of transforming what produces it. But once you move to that deeper level, you stop chasing change, and you start creating it. Quietly, precisely, consistently, and over time. What used to feel fixed starts to feel flexible. What used to feel automatic starts to feel optional. What used to feel like just the way things are starts to reveal itself as a pattern that can be rewritten. And this is where the real change happens. Not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small interruptions, applied at the right place, again and again, until the system adapts. And when it adapts, your reality reorganizes, from the inside out. Not because something outside shifted, but because the structure inside changed. So the question is no longer, can your life change? The question is, are you willing to interrupt the pattern at the exact moment it begins? Because that's where your current reality is being created. And that's the only place it can be rewritten. If this message resonated with you, share it. Help expand this field of consciousness, because each person who awakens illuminates hundreds of others. Leave your comment, your vibration, your testimony, not just for engagement, but because your energy is part of this collective construction. And remember, the highest timeline is not a place in the future. It is a state of being, available here and now. May you walk in peace, clarity, and love. Until the next awakening.